Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good Yontif. It is a pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening for our Chazaka year, for the third year of our Yutes Kislev Farbrengen. We at KJ, Congregation Gilad Jeshurun, are always thrilled to be working with our neighbors and partners at Chabad of the Upper East Side, Rabbi Ben Zion Krasniansky and Tani Krasniansky. And once again, to be partnering with more than 20 mosdos of Chabad Lubavitch of Midtown with Rabbi Yeshua Metzger, Chabad of East Hampton with Rabbi Label Baumgarten, Chabad of Southampton with Rabbi Rafi Kanikoff, Chabad of Hunter College, Rabbi Baruch Jacobson, Chabad of Harlem with Rabbi Yosef Gansberg, Chabad of Watermill, the Chabad Mitzvah Tank with Rabbi Levi Baumgarten, Chabad Loft with Rabbi Yaakov Benkhalter, Chabad Land Center, Rabbi Mendel Waitman, Chabad of Montauk with Rabbi Isaac Baumgarten, Chabad of Beekman Sutton with Rabbi Shmuel Metzger, Chabad Lubavitch Gramercy Park, Rabbi Naftali Rodenstreich, Chabad Israel Center, Rabbi Uriel Wiegler, Chabad Young Professionals of the Upper East Side, Rabbi Willett, Chabad Young Professionals of Midtown, Rabbi Levi Shmutkin, Chabad of Lower East Side, Rabbi Yisrael Stone, Chabad of Tribeca and Soho, Rabbi Zalman Paris, Chabad of Hamilton Heights, Rabbi Yudi Shmutkin, the Chelsea Shul Chabad of Cordoza, Rabbi Chesky Wolf, Chabad House of the Bowery, Rabbi Dov Yonah Korn. It almost feels like the roll call at the Keynote. It is most appropriate that our evening be a partnership and a collaboration, because 19 of Kislev, 19 has significance in another related element of Yutes Kislev. Immediately, when informed of his release, the Alter Rebbe was in the middle of reciting Tehillim. And he was in the middle of reciting a pasuk in Tehillim, Perek Nun Hey 55, pasuk 19. Pada b'shalom nafshi mikravli. That he was reading the words referencing Hashem, who redeemed my soul in peace from those who fight against me. And so therefore, the Alter Rebbe's release in 19th of Kislev in a pasuk Yutes, which deals with release, is the most appropriate combination, a convergence of themes. But the second half of the pasuk is Ki b'rabim hayu imadi, the fact that there were many that were with me. And the idea of Yutes Kislev being a collaboration of Rabim hayu imadi, many who are here with us this evening, is very much an expression and expansion of very much what's at the heart of the Alter Rebbe's teaching. We here at KJ just concluded our JLI class last night. Some of the students are here. And the class concluded with the heart of the Tanya, which is Perek Lamed Beis Lev, in which the Alter Rebbe goes on discussing the essential and critical role of Avas Yisrael, where he declares, Lo chayniku kol Yisrael achim mamish. Jewish people are literally brothers. Mitzad shoresh nafsham b'Hashem echad, from their belief in the fact that their soul emerges from Hashem, Rak shagufim and mechulakim, just the bodies are separate. So it's a very appropriate evening, an appropriate theme that we are here collaborating, representing institutions and rabbis and congregants and students of so many different places. In a sense, our gufim are mechulakim, but our shoresh, our essence, really much is coming together here this evening, and it's a pleasure that we get to celebrate together. To kick off our festivities, it's a pleasure to welcome my former camp counselor at Camp Gan Yisrael New Haven, Rabbi Label Baumgarten, who is here really with his family, who are noted singers and chazanim. So Rabbi Levi Baumgarten, Chazan Shneir Zalman Baumgarten, and Schomberg Baumgarten from the Jewish Children's Museum, who will be singing Nigudim this evening, but to begin the evening by singing Pada b'Shalom Nafshi.
song is in your booklets, song number 1.
brothers Baumgarten. We will hear more uplifting nigunim shortly. Just a reminder that in your programs is a coupon for $5 off purchase of the Hasidic books that will be available as the evening goes by. This evening is about uplifting and elevating and moving forward, so a good way to do so is through learning and having books. For those who are here who may leave early, the program's live stream. You shouldn't leave early. For those who are watching it on live stream, well, hello. We're very pleased once again to be able to hear from Rabbi Haskell Lookstein, the Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation Kilat Jesher, and a leader of how the Rebbe and his teachings, which are based on the Tanya, personally impacted my life.
How about it, everybody? Bani et kavod, 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 absolutely gewaldig. I love Chabad music. Since the first long playing record, LP, with the green cover, gorgeous, gorgeous music, because it's music that comes from the neshama. It's not just beautiful music and beautiful notes. It's beautiful thoughts, it's beautiful feelings, and beautiful people. To talk about the Rebbe's influence on my life. I only had one encounter with the Rebbe. It was on Sunday, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, 1989. Rabbi Kotlarski, who many of you know, arranged that meeting weeks in advance. Little could either of us have known that Saturday night, before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, or on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, because it was already Motzoi Shabbos, my daughter Shira got engaged to her future husband, Dr. Larry Baruch, which was great for Shira and great for Shira's parents. Larry is very, very precious to all of us. So when I met the Rebbe, I think I was number 2 on a line of about 3,000 people waiting to meet the Rebbe. I don't know who number 1 was. I had in mind my daughter's engagement. And at the time, he gave me $4. Yeah. $4, 4 single dollars. First, Le'iloi Nishmas Avicha, in memory of my father, whose mother was a Chabadnik, and who was probably related in some ways to one of the Rebbes. I think the Rebbe before the current Rebbe that we all knew. $1 for the Kehillah. $1 for the Zug HaChadash, the new couple. And the fourth dollar was for me, personally. All of them to be given to tzedakah. I followed the Rebbe's advice to the T. The next morning in shul, I put all $4 into the basket. When the collector, the Gabbai Tzedakah, Asher Levitsky, came around, that's what the dollars were for. It never occurred to me to exchange the dollars for other dollars. The Rebbe said, these dollars are for tzedakah. That was it. So you'll say, the Rebbe's influence on my life started right there. But I read a lot about the Rebbe. In particular, I read Joseph Telushkin, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's wonderful, wonderful book, Rebbe. Published about 5 or 6 years ago. If there's anybody sitting here who hasn't read Rebbe by Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, I have to tell you, it is one of the most thrilling, wonderful, and influential books I have ever read in my life. In that book, he gave 2 examples, among others, of special qualities that made the Rebbe the Rebbe. And I have to say that those 2 qualities in particular had influence on my life. Rabbi Krasniansky, how much time do I have?
All night.
You're the mother
All
that
night.
asked us.
Okay. I'm going to take my watch off anyway, just as a siyag. One of them was how, when the Rebbe had a chance to do a mitzvah, he didn't waste a minute. He did it immediately. Now, there is a principle in halacha, mitzvah bo liyodcha al tachmitzeno. If you get a chance to do a mitzvah, don't let it get chametzdik, sour. Take care of it right away. And zrizin makdimin lemitzvos, which is a source for making a bris milah early in the morning. People who are careful about mitzvahs try to do them early. But there was something extra about the Rebbe not wasting time when he had a chance to do a mitzvah. And one of the examples in the book was somebody asked him for something, and the Rebbe knew that there was somebody in South Africa who could be helpful in this regard. So he called that person in South Africa. Except that when the person picked up the phone in South Africa, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Right. And not that the Rebbe wasn't fully aware of that fact. He was perfectly aware of it. But there was a chance to do a mitzvah, and he wasn't going to be machmitz the mitzvah. He wasn't going to let it get sour, and he did it right away. And I sort of laughed a little bit when I read that piece. And then, maybe 2 weeks later, a woman from the congregation came to my office with a problem. Her husband had trouble with the lining around his heart, and he had to go to the Mayo Clinic, which is one of the few places in America where they specialized in the surgery that he would need, and it was very risky surgery. And she said, do you know anybody who could help get my husband into the Mayo Clinic? So I thought to myself, who do I know in the Mayo Clinic? And then a name popped into my head. Some of you will recognize his name. Danny Abraham, the former owner of Slim Fast, who sold Slim Fast for a few $1 billion and has been an incredible philanthropist since. He had some kind of medical condition and went to the Mayo. I knew this. I knew him quite well. He had 4 children, 4 girls who graduated from Ramaz, and he was a member of the congregation for many, many years, and a friend. And he built a building for the Mayo Clinic following the successful treatment that he had. So I thought to myself, maybe I could get Dan Abraham to help. So I took out what I always have in my pocket. Oh, how are you? I took out what I always have in my pocket, a card on which I could write down things that I would do a little bit later, which of course I often never get to read, so I don't do the things that I expect to do a little bit later. And I took my pen out and I start to write, call Dan Abraham. And suddenly I remembered the Rebbe and South Africa. And I said, wait a minute. And I went over to my desk and I called Dan Abraham. You don't get Dan Abraham right away, you get his assistant. And she said, he's not here, he's on his yacht off the coast, this is the summertime, off the coast of France. He used to do that every single summer. I said, oh, all right, I guess it'll have to wait until the fall. She said, no, no, no. Maybe I can patch you in to his yacht off the coast of southern France. Amishigas. Next thing I know, hello, Rabbi Lookstein, how are you? Dan Abraham. I told him the story, and he said, sure, I can help. Write me an email with the man's name and the person he was in touch with in the Mayo Clinic and the particular doctor, and I'll see what I can do. Within, I think, less than 2 weeks, the man was in the Mayo Clinic. He was operated on, and Baruch Hashem is leading a perfectly normal life. It's about 5 years later, because it's 5 years ago that I read Telushkin's book. And Baruch Hashem, one influence of the Rebbe. And it's a big influence because by nature, I'm a procrastinator. The Rebbe, at least in mitzvahs, turned me from a procrastinator into an immediate doer. In other things in life, I'm still a procrastinator. But I don't know how the Rebbe functioned in everything else in life. But I know when it came to mitzvahs, he didn't let any grass grow under his feet. That's one example. Second example came, it's really in Rabbi Telushkin's book too, but it's expanded upon in a book that was published last June before the 25th anniversary, 25th yard site of the Rebbe. And it's called The Rebbe's Positivity Bias. The author is Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson. How many of you know the name Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson? Okay, not enough. He's apparently a Rav in England, And it's another book that I recommend. Look, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin is an author who's on a separate level from everybody else. Rabbi Kalmanson is not on that level. Rabbi Kalmanson wrote a very, very important book about the Rebbe. About how the Rebbe, and how he saw everything in a positive vein. And he starts out by quoting how the Rebbe opened his inaugural address as a Rebbe on a cold, wintry night in 1951. He started out with Bossi Legani Achosi Chaloha, a quote from the Song of Songs, from Shir HaShirim. I have come into my garden, my beloved, says God to Israel. Think about 1951, in the shadow of the Holocaust, in the impoverished and tenuous conditions of an infant state of Israel, in the crisis of assimilation of American Jewry, the Rebbe looked out at the world and referred to it as God's garden. How do you and I look at the world today? How do we look at the world in which there have been 3 massive attacks on Jews in synagogues or in stores where Jews were murdered? How do we look at that world? The Rebbe looked at the world of 1951 and referred to it as God's garden. And when he was asked, how can you look at the world, look at what you have gone through in your life? You lived not a life of peace and privilege, which led to your positivity bias. On the contrary, the Rebbe lived through pogroms, through the killing fields of World War I, through a typhus epidemic, through a refugee crisis in which he was a refugee, through the persecution and forced exile of his father, whom he never saw again after he was taken away in the Bolshevik Revolution. He lived through World War II and the carpet bombing of Warsaw and the brutal murder of his grandmother, brother, and numerous other relatives at the hands of the Nazis. And perhaps the most painful of all, he lived his entire life childless. How could he look at life as Bossi Legani in a positive way? When he was asked, he said, I chose to look at life that way. I made a conscious choice. Perhaps I couldn't have survived any other way. It's a lesson for us. Some things in life that we think we have no control over, we really do. How we choose to look at life affects how life is. Just like Reb Chaim Brisker, Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, who was the great, great Talmudic mind, halachic mind of the 19th century, but he was also an incredible Baal Chesed. Every person in need could go to Reb Chaim's house and the need would be addressed. He was so involved in people who were needy that his grandson, the Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, was afraid to go to his house, because in his house you would see the lame, the limp, the person without limbs, all kinds of strange people. Because Reb Chaim was a tremendous Baal Chesed. And he was asked once, how did you ever become this? This great Talmud Chacham, how did you become a Baal Chesed? And he answered, you know, by nature, I'm not really a Baal Chesed. By nature, I'm capable of cruelty. I had to work on myself to become a Baal Chesed. Great spiritual giants are not necessarily born that way. They choose to become that way by an act of choice. Not a bad lesson. So how do you look at life positively when things are rough? So one answer in Rav Kalmanson's book is not to concentrate on what we don't have, but rather to concentrate on what we have. Sounds simple, but it isn't. The Rebbe taught that lesson, among other places, in a response to a letter from a man in a very difficult situation, who wrote to the Rebbe and said throughout his life he never experienced any good. And the Rebbe answered him in the following letter. It seems that you do not sense the contradiction in your letter. For a man whom God has blessed with a wife and children, to say that he has never seen any good is ungrateful to an alarming degree. Hundreds, even thousands of people pray every day to be blessed with children and would give anything they own to have a single child, but have not as yet merited this. But you, the recipient of this blessing, which it seems came to you without your having to especially pray for it, you don't recognize the wealth and happiness and the blessings you have, and you write twice in your letter that you have never experienced anything good. So stop focusing on what you don't have, and focus instead on what you do have. I want to just give one other lesson, or one other method for having a positivity bias. By the way, the lesson is very important to us today. We live in a world right now, in America, where things are happening that we never dreamt would happen here. We have been living in a veritable Gan Eden. But there are frightening times through which we are going. And we have to maintain a positivity bias. It doesn't mean that we don't have to do things. We have to fight. We have to stand up. We have to make a lot of noise. We have to fight anti-Semitism in this country and not allow it to become culturally acceptable. Not to mention physically acceptable. But in the meantime, we have to remain positive about what we have. So the Rebbe said, we have to verbally express our hakoras hatov, our gratitude, for what we have that is good in our lives. And the Rebbe drew from Jewish ritual to respond to someone who complained about his life. The complainer wrote as follows: I read your letter with, the complainer complained. The Rebbe wrote as follows. I read your letter with great shock. If you pay attention to the simple meaning of the 18 morning blessings in which you bless God at the beginning of every day, you will see that you have been blessed with all of them. In addition, you've been blessed with good health, good parents, good education, a good community, a good profession, a good livelihood, and more. If so, what is the justification for your complaints? Hakoras hatov, expressing gratitude to God for all the things we take for granted, creates positivity and happiness in our lives. Every day we acknowledge our blessings. We can see. We have nice clothing. We can move our limbs, unlike some people. We can stand up. We can walk around. Rabbi Kalmanson tells about how the Rebbitzin once asked the Rebbe what was his favorite prayer. And he responded immediately, my favorite prayer is Modeh Ani. Think about it. Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayom shehechazarta bi nishmasi v'chemlo rabo emunasecha. I thank you, O eternal King, for you have restored my soul to me in mercy. Great is your faithfulness. This prayer, Rav Kalmanson reminds us, which we say upon awakening, doesn't even have God's name in it. But it is a clear expression of gratitude to the Almighty for the gift of life. And it is our first act of the day, an inspiration for looking at our lives with positivity. You ask, what was the influence of the Rebbe on my life? Probably a number of influences. But if I had to take two, one would be not to waste a minute when you have a chance to do a mitzvah. Do it right away. And number two, to look at our lives with the gratitude of Modeh Ani and to be positive about everything that happens to us and even everything that happens in our world, because we concentrate on what we have and not what we don't have. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Thank you, Rabbi Lookstein. Moving right along so as not to waste any time, it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Leibel Baumgarten to come up and speak about the central role of nigun, of melody in Hasidic and in Jewish life.
Good young to everybody.
Yep, good.
Growing up in a Hasidic home, the pen of the soul is music. I'm sure everybody knows. Melody, or we call a nigun, or nigunim, songs, goes back, all the way back to King David, who is called Ne'im Zemirot Yisrael, the author of the Tehillim, the book of Psalms. And then we go to King Solomon, as Rabbi Lookstein mentioned before, V'hasi L'gani, Song of Songs. So melody songs, nigunim, played a great role for the Jewish people throughout history. And as we go on in history, most of the nigunim, most of the melodies were all in the Tehillim, songs with words. And as the Hasidic, starting with the Baal Shem Tov, so from words, nigunim, songs came without words. Of course, I'm sure everybody read and learned about the Leviim, the Levites, who sang every single day in the Beis HaMikdash. Not only did they sing, but they played the instruments, and people said it was the most gorgeous music. But then we come to the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, who had on Shabbat special nigunim, some with words and some without words. And every song was a different expression. In fact, there is a special place in heaven, in the spiritual world, called Heichal HaNigunim, the chambers of song. And each song, each nigun, expresses a different feeling. And as I was brought up in Brooklyn, amongst Chabad Hasidim, every Rebbe, starting from the first Chabad Rebbe, what we're celebrating today, Yutas Kislev, is known that the Alter Rebbe composed about 10 songs. And every Rebbe, all the Rebbes after, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, or they composed, or they had their own choir called a Kapella. Until our Rebbe, who is known that in the 50s and 60s, after the Hakafot in 770, he would come down 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning and teach a song, a nigun, some with words and some without words. And what he would do is he would explain each of the nigunim which he's going to sing. Of course, one of the nigunim which we might sing today is the thirst of God, Samalacha Nafshi, Komalacha Basari. And there were some songs which he sang, which he composed and taught without words. One of the nigunim, one of the songs which the Alter Rebbe composed, was called the Four Stanzas, or known as the Dalet Bavis, or in Yiddish, the Vier Falten. It's a song which is slow, but it's very, very uplifting. And this song, which actually we'll be singing with my brothers, I'm going to call them up in a moment, is called the Alter Rebbe's Nigun, Dalet Bavis, and it reaches many, many levels. In particular, it reaches the four spiritual worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiyah. Also, it reaches the four letters of God's name. And that's why this nigun, this song, is not always sung only on special occasions, like the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, when by a wedding, or by a Farbrengen like this. So I think it would be a proper, it's okay, Rabbi, that if we would sing the Alter Rebbe's nigun, I'll call my brothers to come up again. And I would think that while we're singing, you're helping us and you'll help us sing along, we could reach very high levels in our spiritual and our physical life. So without further ado, Dalet Bavis. And because the nigun of the Alter Rebbe's nigun is so lofty, so we actually, introduction into the Alter Rebbe's nigun, we sing another song, also a little slow, but this is also one of the songs which was composed by the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rab Sholem Dov Ber, and from this the introduction, we'll go into the Alter Rebbe song.
Oh,
It is. Ladies and gentlemen, as we move on with our program, it's a pleasure to call someone who doesn't need an introduction, our friend, our mentor, my partner, whose classes and inspiration and friendship have touched the lives of thousands here on the Upper East Side. Hopefully you have checked into TanyaClass.com for the shows, for the podcasts, and launched today is the MyPrayerClass.com. So it's a pleasure to call up Rabbi Ben-Zion Krasniansky, Chabad of the Upper East Side. Tanya breathing new life into prayer.
Thank you, Rabbi Eli, Rabbi Luxton, fellow Shluchim. What a treat, the Baumgarten brothers. Wow, let's hear it for the... Big thank you to Chen Harpaz for the launching of the new site, prayerclass.com. The very end of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe speaks about davening, prayer, and it's the only time in the Tanya, it's the 9th essay, the 5th part of the Tanya, where he inserts Yiddish. He writes, Gewalt, Gewalt, like he can't contain himself, he's in such pain. How something so essential like davening and prayer is neglected. So let's focus today a little on how the Alter Rebbe illuminated for us and told us what is the real meaning of prayer. You know, when the Alter Rebbe himself had a choice, he grew up not knowing that his parents were Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov. They were sworn to, the Baal Shem Tov told them, that they're not allowed to tell their oldest son, that they are Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov. It's something that he has to discover on his own. So he said he had a choice to make. There were two centers. One was Vilna and one was Mizrich. In Vilna, you learn how to learn. And in Mizrich, you learn how to daven, how to pray. He says, to learn, I knew a little how to learn. I decided I'm going to go to Mizrich to learn how to daven. So although the Talmud in Tractate Brachas tells us that there were Hasidim Harishonim who used to daven every day, 9 hours a day. 1 hour they would prepare for the davening, they would take an hour to daven, and then they would take an hour to assimilate that experience, times 3. That was a handful. Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, introduced the idea of davening to every Jew and breathed new life into what davening is. The Talmud says, where do we learn davening in the Torah? It says in the Torah you should serve Hashem with all your heart, and that refers to service. How do you service Hashem? By praying. And this is the central theme in a Jew's life. There are 3 pillars. The beginning of ethics of our fathers, the world stands on 3 pillars. You have Torah to the right, Gemilas Chesed, kindness, and mitzvahs to the left. And what's in the center? Avodah, which is sacrifices. And today the substitute for sacrifice is davening, prayer. The question is, why is that the central pillar? When we're studying Torah, are we not serving Hashem? When we do a mitzvah, are we not serving Hashem? We only serve Hashem when we pray. Maimonides is of the opinion that mitzvah, there's a biblical obligation. One of the 613 mitzvah, there's a biblical obligation to pray every day. The format of prayer, to pray 3 times a day, that was an enactment by the rabbis. Nachmanides disagrees. Nachmanides says there's no such biblical commandment. The only discussion is whether there's any situation when you're biblically obligated to pray. The majority opinion is, yes, when you have an emergency, you have an urgent situation, and Hashem is the only one who can help you, then you have a mitzvah to pray. Other than that, the whole prayer is essentially rabbinic. So let's get this straight. According to Maimonides, it's 1 out of the 613 mitzvah. According to Nachmanides, it's not even a mitzvah. And yet, this is the central, this is how we serve Hashem, this is the central pillar. And the Alter Rebbe asks, furthermore, what do you mean serving Hashem? Hashem needs our services. God is perfect. He doesn't need anything. So how exactly are we servicing Hashem? So the Alter Rebbe explains. He says, because what is the whole purpose of creation? Why did God create this world? He created the world because he desired to have a dwelling place in this world. In other words, Hashem wanted us to be conscious of his reality, to be conscious of his truth. Now, for the first 2,000 years of creation, there was no prayer. You know, every good teacher knows, when are you succeeding? When you evoke a response from your students. If you're not getting any response, you haven't reached it. Prayer is our response to Hashem. Hashem is creating us, and he's sustaining us, and he gives us life, and the miracles of life, and the wonders of... And if we go through life and there's no personal response, we're not responding to everything around us, to what's happening. For the first 2,000 years of creation, there was no prayer. The rabbis say the patriarchs instituted prayer. The Jewish people invented prayer. You don't find in the Torah that Adam prayed. You don't find in the Torah that Noah prayed. As a matter of fact, the Zohar speaks very sharply about Noah. That the flood is called the flood, the waters of Noah, because he's to blame. Why? He built an ark for 120 years. He tried to rebuke. So fine, you were not successful. But why didn't you pray? He didn't even pray for his generation. The first one to pray was Abraham. Some say that davening comes from the word da'avuhum, comes from our ancestor, comes from patriarch. So prayer is our response to Hashem. And this is our hallmark. Hakol Kol Yaakov. This is the hallmark of the Jewish people. The voice of Jacob. Prayer is so essential to a Jew's life. And this is why this is the central pillar and central theme in a Jew's life. Because if it's all about consciousness, prayer is all about our conscious awareness of Hashem. So much more so that it's even more important to have kavanah, to have intent when it comes to prayer, even more so than when it comes to doing a mitzvah. As Maimonides says, if you pray without intent, ain't no tefillah. You haven't davened. There is no davening. If you do a mitzvah without intent, without consciousness, it's like a body without a soul. So yes, what's a body without a soul? A corpse. But at least you have a corpse. Maimonides says if you pray without intent, ain't no tefillah. You don't even have a corpse. You have nothing. The essence of prayer is your consciousness. If you don't have the minimal consciousness that you're standing in front of Hashem and you're having a dialogue, a discussion, a talk, you're petitioning Hashem, you have to pray the Shemona Esrei over again. It's not called a prayer. And that's why this is the central theme in a Jew's life. Because mitzvot as well. The intent is an essential part of the mitzvah. What is a mitzvah without intent? Like a body without a soul, meaning it's a corpse. It's nothing. What do you have when you have a body without a soul? You have nothing. So prayer is the foundation, which is why we start our day off with prayer. The mitzvot and the Torah study, that follows from the prayer. Just like the patriarchs preceded the giving of the Torah and the giving of the mitzvot. The prayers precede. This is the foundation. It's that consciousness and that awareness. But you may ask, wait a minute. We know that a mitzvah, the Talmud tells us a Jew should do a mitzvah even without the proper intent. Just do the mitzvah. Why? So just do the mitzvah. Eventually you'll come to do it with the proper intent. So we see that it's the deed that matters most. In Judaism, it's all about the deed. It's about the action. It's not about the intent. But if you listen carefully to what the Chazal say, what the rabbis say, why should a Jew do a mitzvah even without kavanah, without intent? Why? Only because we're certain that inevitably this Jew will come to do the mitzvah for the right reason, the right intent. How can we be so certain? Because look at the words of the rabbis. Every word in the Torah is so precise. Inside. Toich means inside. Because inside this act, which was done mechanically and by rote and without the proper intent and for an ulterior motive, you will find the proper motive. Because deep down inside every Jewish neshama, every Jew is doing the mitzvah for all the right reasons. We may not be conscious of it. But since that is our core, that is our essence, we are certain, it's inevitable, that that essence will emerge and will surface to our consciousness. But theoretically, let us say if we knew that the mitzvah will never ever come to the point that you're going to do the mitzvah lishma, then the Torah would tell you don't do the mitzvah. The only reason the Torah is telling you to do the mitzvah is why? Because we're certain that mitzvah shalai lishma. So the intent is essential. People make a mistake. People think intent. As long as you're doing, you got the deed done. Who cares if it's by rote or mechanical? No. The intent, the consciousness is essential. That's the whole reason, that's the whole purpose why Hashem created the world. It's only because we're so certain that and that's why a minor is exempt from doing mitzvah. A minor who writes tefillin, those tefillin are not kosher. Why? The minor has deeds, has action. But the minor is not old enough, not mature enough to have the proper intent, proper consciousness. Without consciousness, you have a corpse without a soul, you have nothing. So prayer is the essential pillar, it's avodah. This is how we're servicing Hashem. The Jewish people are in the servicing business. We are servicing Hashem. We're fulfilling His desire, His whole purpose for creation. But the question remains, the simple, literal meaning of prayer is, you're praying for your own personal needs. All the blessings in the Shmoneh Esrei, you're praying for your own personal needs. How are we servicing Hashem when we're praying for our own personal needs? So now the Rebbe explains. Because the revelation of godliness that we experience through prayer is an even greater revelation than through the mitzvah. Because when you have a need, and Hashem is the only one who can help you, and then miraculously, by divine intervention, suddenly you're cured, and suddenly your financial situation clears up, or whatever you're praying for. That direct intervention, that's a direct revelation of the essence of Hashem in the most tangible, in the most physical way. When you do the mitzvah, it doesn't physically change the object. But through prayer, you are physically changing your life in the world. You see the miracle when Hashem responds to your prayer and answers your prayer. It's a direct revelation of godliness. So we are servicing Hashem. It's just one example how Hasidus breathes life, illuminates. It helps us understand the depth, helps us relate and to connect to what we're doing. Prayer, we spend so much time praying. But to really understand and to get into the prayer, to really appreciate and to feel it and to be conscious of it and to connect with Hashem. And that's just a general introduction to prayer. But imagine every word in the prayer. We started this class, myprayerclass.com. We hope to go through the prayer book. We'll continue on January 7th on the Chabad House E77 on Tuesdays 6:30 to 8. And we'll try to learn and understand, become intimate with the prayer book. The prayer book is what unites the entire Jewish people. When it comes to Torah study, every Jew studies in their own level. But from the greatest Jew to the simplest Jew, from your youth till 120, we're all praying in the same book, all reading from the same words. It's what unifies the Jewish people. It talks to the heart of the Jewish people. It touches the heart of the Jewish people. And our ultimate prayer is, we ask Hashem, we should merit this Farbrengen, we should merit the coming of Mashiach, when the consciousness of godliness will flood the earth. And we'll continue this beautiful Farbrengen on the Upper East Side of Jerusalem. Good Yom Tov.
Boy, that's a tough act to follow. I'm glad I'm not the next speaker. But the next speaker is no slouch in his own right. It's a pleasure to invite Professor Ron Kivitz of Columbia University Business School to explain to us why I learned Tanya.
Hi everyone. I'll keep my comments very short. It's getting late. And I do feel like I have been set up here. It's not a difficult path to follow. It's an impossible one to speak after Rabbi Krasniansky, my rabbi, and also the beautiful music that we heard before, and Rabbi Luxton's beautiful speeches. that we've heard. So when Rabbi Krasniansky invited me to speak today, and I'm very grateful for everything, I asked what is the topic, and he said it's going to be about why I learned Tanya, and so I'll try to briefly explain why I've learned some Tanya, and I really hope to learn more. Is the negative is why I don't learn enough Tanya. Is really should be why don't I learn more Tanya? Should really be the question, because the profound learnings that I've found from the little bit of Tanya that I've learned just suggest how much more there is to study. So why have I learned Tanya? I guess one reason, to be completely frank, is just to be close to the rabbi, just to be there in the rabbi's presence and hear him and see him, and be close to his family and his community and his students. Maybe that is, I would have to admit, maybe that's a big reason or number one reason about this world, how this world works, because it really does in very mysterious ways. What we see is not what's actually there oftentimes. There's another layer. And so I think that Tanya really helped. Professor, my area of focus in research and teaching and so on is in this area called behavioral economics. It's really an area that has been, to a good extent, started by a lot of Israelis and Jews and obviously other people. And it deals with a mixture or clash between psychology and economics. It's almost, you could say, a Jewish form of economics. It's very practical, it's not just theoretical. And it deals with change. How can you change people's behavior, for example, people's choices? How can you try and understand their choices? So I found through the, you can hear me okay with the, great. I found with the Tanya classes that I would learn a lot about what I'm supposed to be an expert in, what I'm supposed to be an expert through research and teaching. I would learn from Tanya. And sometimes, I'll try to give you a couple examples later, we would do studies, research, experiments, or analyze data. Then I would come to Rabbi Krasniansky's class on Tanya and suddenly understand why we're getting these results that we're getting. Suddenly have insight as to what is the underlying cause for these findings. And I was really astonished by that. So for example, Rabbi Luchtin talked about a positivity bias, and maybe one of the most fundamental findings in behavioral economics that Daniel Kahneman and later on Dick Thaler and Amos Tversky, if he was alive, would have won the Nobel Prize like they did as well, was this negativity bias, that people tend to be much more focused, pay much more attention to negative information or negative outcomes or losses. Whereas what you have told us today is the opposite, that the Rabbi said you focus on a positivity bias. And to me that is really a lesson from the Rambam and Maimonides, that if your bicycle is falling too much to one side, you should try to make it fall to the other side, even exaggerate. If humans have this, some of us, this negativity bias, then a good antidote is to try and have this positivity bias. Some of what I've learned from the rabbi, I don't know if it's from Tanya per se, or hearing you in the services and what you have taught us. I think a lot of it is Tanya also has to do with the power of absence, of actually what's not in there. You know, a useful card is a card that is actually empty. It can carry something. A useful speaker is somebody who doesn't talk much. Hard for a professor. I'll try to keep that in mind. And I remember one of the Tanya classes, I may have mentioned this last year, I'll mention it again. We, in the morning, we had gotten data showing that people are more creative when they are getting creativity tasks or they are writing in a way that is ephemeral, meaning whatever is written disappears after 10 seconds. I know what I'm saying is very abstract, I can't really convey the entire research, but half of the participants whatever they saw, whatever they wrote, stayed permanent on the computer in front of them. This was a classic creativity test that we gave them, or a few of them. The other half, whatever they wrote, would disappear, would stay there. Were much more creative. They scored much higher on creativity tasks, particularly when we induced some anxiety, when we focused them a little bit on their ego, when we told them you're going to be evaluated, or people are going to watch you, or you have accountability, or you have a time pressure. Particularly when they were a bit stressed about themselves, they were much more creative, significantly more creative, when whatever they did disappeared after a few seconds. In the Tanya class, Rabbi Krasniansky taught us about tzimtzum. And I do apologize if for not being a good enough student about what I'm going to say if I mislead, but my understanding is that tzimtzum, God created this world by tzimtzum, by removing himself. He would not be able to create this world if he was here. It's too imperfect. He had to remove himself. And for me, that really explained, I hope I'm not bringing down Tanya to the level of science, but it helped me explain why is this happening. Because if we are concerned about ourself, our ego, we can't be creative. We need the absence. We need to remove ourselves. Another class in Tanya, you taught us about tzedakah, the importance of giving tzedakah. One lesson, it has a strong pull on humans. It's not always a bad thing, money, actually. It has a very strong pull, and some of us sometimes have a problem with money. It becomes too much, too strong a pull. The cure for that is tzedakah, is actually to do the opposite of what you would naturally tend to do, which is hoard more money, is actually to give it away. And by giving it away, you're able maybe to overcome some of that problem. In those days, we would collect data showing, I'll take maybe a couple more minutes, showing that if you give money as an incentive, compared to something more meaningful, an incentive that is meaningful that people define for themselves, compared to that, if you give them money, during the time that you're trying to get them incentivized, people really respond. They want the money. But the moment the incentive is over, the incentive period is over, the moment this reward program is over, they stop doing whatever you ask them to do. They don't really learn to behave in a desired way. They just do it for the money. We found that people would even cheat if they can on some tasks just to get the money. Whereas if you give them a different type of reward, they would not. So again, that, a big portion of my understanding of these findings came from the Tanya classes. I'll conclude by saying that a lot of what I've learned from, I think I've learned from Tanya and from your teachings and so on, is about change. Again, in behavioral economics, we try to understand change. We try to help people change their behavior. And a lot of that has, for me, been about trying to change oneself. As Rabbi Luckstein also said, if you really want to change something in the outside world, you have to first change yourself. Why is that? Well, one, it is about perceptions. If there's more to the world, more to life than what we see, if there's a hidden reality, if there's another parallel existence or world, like there's some dualistic existence, then perception, which we might think is just subjective, actually might tell us something about something that is very objective, but we just can't see it. And that perception, as I teach my students, is critical. If you want to sell something, if you want to raise money for a venture, if you want to convince your employees to come with you for a journey, you have to also create a perception. And part of that perception is even how you see yourself. Once you start changing yourself, you might be able to change something else. So in the last couple of years, thanks, I think, to the Tanya, I've become very interested in researching and teaching this concept of change, and particularly what I would call and others would call second order change, which for me completely comes, even though people who've researched it who may not I've ever heard about the Tanya, but for me has come completely from the Tanya. If I want to change something, the natural tendency is to approach it. The natural tendency, if I want to convince somebody, and we're opposing, and he is pulling here, and I'm pulling here, and I want to get them to me, toward me, the natural tendency is to pull harder and harder. That you might call, and some people in the scientific literature have called it a first order change. It's like pushing the pedal more or less. It's more of the same. I want to get this person closer to me. I pull him. She pulls me. Nothing actually changes. You can exert a lot of force. Nothing changes. Second order change would be paradoxical. Would be in a way, as you have told me, Rabbi, many times, if you want to really change, if you want to really create something new, you need to first empty out. You need to first lose. You need to first maybe even give up and empty out. So if you really want to engage in real change and get this person closer to you, one thing you can do is just let go. And go a little bit towards them. If they continue pulling, they're going to fall over. They will have no choice at this point but to let go a little bit as well. And by doing that, they're getting a bit closer to you now. That is second order change. It's paradoxical. For me, I've learned, I've taught it, I'm doing research on it. I know that Columbia University students may not know that it comes from the Tanya, but they're responding to it, as you said, Rabbi. I feel it's working because they're responding. I've used it on my own life, on my own endeavors. And that's one reason why I have learned, not enough, way not enough, but I've learned Tanya. So I'll just say in the ending, you know, Tanya, what I understood is it's also about being practical. Is that true? Not just talk and theory, but actually also actions. So first order change is what I've been telling Mendel. He's here for a year now. I've been telling Mendel, yes, I'll come and I'll learn more Tanya. I promised Mendel I'll come, I'll learn more Tanya. But it was just between me and Mendel and Shlomo. And second order change is changing the rules of the game and committing on video. Putting your bidding. That also is behavioral economics. I've published a lot of research on it. But I believe what I'm saying now comes from the Tanya. I'm committing to all of you that next year I will study much more Tanya. And I'm so grateful to you and all this community for everything you're doing. Thank you so much.
was kommt da rein, drüber Chulu, sie bleibt noch alle die Scheile, bei Kehl Jochel, darf nicht so kommen, und andere in die alle in Jungen. Wir können gerne den ganzen Stuhl, ungewöhnlich. Aber das kam, wir kamen, und in Jungen bildet er nicht zu. In gewöhnlich Gufe, a Geride in gewöhnlich. Und mis Masbi, haben wir so klein, Apel, Pivas, mit tollen Kinas wurde. Ich will nachher, haben wir so wissen sein, als wir sein Eitra Weihe, was ja nachzuwenden. Besser dort die Scheile, Lichere, was du der Ewige gedacht behalten. Teere wird dann rufen, Teere, hey. Und der Ewige, der Masbi kam in Jon, soll sich legen in Sechel oder, a viele in Sechel der Nusch. Schule, Allah es kam in Sechel der Kischele. dann noch sagen, also da eine einzige Linie, wo das nicht Galle werden lassen wurde. Und wenn wir sagen, dass wir Pashtus mit dort kein Kilo, wo darf man haben den Matten? Von Schinte Begaluso, Moschir Begaluso, Kollechet Wachs Miswal Begaluso. Und an Leifen von Heilig und Messi, Nikla Marius, Elbach Jeh, Schein, Rube Mischalchavei. Ich weiß das, hat der einzige Biefer, was noch das Malen gewährt. Der Rebbe so gewollt, aber so schreien bei Mitis. Ich mache Kevin Kol Hayei. Als wissen, als Worte, oder der Munde, oder Kolponim an die Kude, als da gute Sachen Gobos, kann nicht sein, dass so schreiende Szene da der Heeres hat mir mit den ganzen Stühlen echt da eine Kude in sein Nefischer Kies versorgt den Herzer Chais hat ihn Privatieres. Und der Rebischte will das mit, also sein Privatieres getan. Will mir so haben der Munde Pschütter. Als Trevi Joshua Hawaii, will aber so haben der Munde Pschütter. Als ich weiß ja have to be, aber ich hasse mich schon, dass wir so hoffentlich besehen, aber viele in der Gutes das sehen. Können wir noch nicht schreien mit den Stühlen, weil der Rebischte will aber so schreien, als Kivinu kol ayen kol regesh v'yeh. Und dann noch sagt mir Liebe, le Pummel Gali, aber es nicht eine Sache, was kann sein begonnen. Mit das Meilen, das ist die Beschäftige, das ist eine Sache, was kann sein begonnen. Es hat die Kachen nicht im Bauch. In ganz Heder ist falsch, in ganz Sinne von Tevel Mitzvit. Hier soll sein in Gold. Wer wird noch in dem Gold von Nikus in dem Schirre und in der Ruf Gufe, als durchgegangen nachher, 1900 Jahre. War da wirklich schon sagt mir, dass der Liebe der Pumme begann, viele der Pumme ist aller Kodesh Baruch war ja. Sagt mir, na Zafel Pikei, darf sein, dass ihm Gdele bejeser Bichlal. Und als Simcha Amitis nicht rausgestellt in die Machte und soll misshallig sein. die Goyim, die Scheuße, die alle in Jönnen an der Wabbel in der Simcha, wo das ist nach Heche zuheilen, in den Peres Geder HaGolus, und wird ein Mann ein Mai sein, wie es Mischiach sind Keynote, a viele, das wird ein Mai sein, der Rege Chag. Alachas Kammer, das ist ein Mai sein. Bekam Scheuß und bekam Yomi Bechulu, und mit Batraxa, hat das Ressach wegen Eini und wegen Shishim Ribum Israel. In Bishas me nennt Reis Zei Aleme, zusammen mit Mashiach Tzidkenu, bereits mit Mashiach Tzidkenu, zusammen mit Schinte Begalusse. Ich kann dir sich vorstellen, was heißt, Wege früher, wenn das Ressach wegen dem ganzen Kohl Gottel, zusammen mit Gottel Hawaii Birel Keynote. Alachas Kamo Bekamo, das Haus zu mehr wie ein Rege Echod, mehr wie ein Scheitechod und mehr wie Jemechod.
Wärme, oder?